What if everything you call fate, luck, talent, limitation, and circumstance is nothing more than a program you accepted without consent? A silent script written into your subconscious long before you ever chose who you wanted to become? And what if the life you are living right now is not a reflection of your potential, but a perfect mirror of the thoughts you have allowed to dominate your inner world? Most people recoil from this question because it strips away the most comforting illusion of all, the belief that failure is accidental and success is reserved for the gifted, the fortunate, or the chosen. Napoleon Hill understood something far more unsettling and far more empowering. He understood that the subconscious mind is the unseen architect of destiny, that it does not reason, it does not judge, it does not argue, it simply accepts and executes. Whatever thoughts you allow to settle into it through repetition, emotion, and belief, it accepts as law. It then works day and night to shape your behavior, your perception, your decisions, and eventually your results, in exact alignment with those thoughts. This is not mysticism. This is psychological law. Your subconscious mind is the soil. Your dominant thoughts are the seeds. Your life is the harvest. And most people are living with crops they never consciously planted. From the moment you were young, before logic was formed and before self-awareness was sharpened, ideas were dropped into your mind by parents, teachers, peers, religion, culture, and repeated emotional experiences. Some of those ideas empowered you. Most of them confined you. They told you what was realistic. They told you what was possible. They told you who you were allowed to become and, more importantly, who you were not. These ideas were accepted without resistance because the subconscious does not resist. It absorbs. By the time you reached adulthood, a mental pattern was already operating beneath your awareness, directing your habits, filtering your perception, and quietly deciding how far you would go before you stopped. Hill observed that men do not fail because of lack of ability. They fail because of lack of definiteness of purpose, lack of faith in their own power, lack of persistence, and most dangerously because of mental habits that sabotage effort before it matures into achievement. The subconscious mind becomes the storehouse of fear when fear is repeatedly entertained. It becomes the engine of confidence when faith is deliberately impressed upon it. It becomes the servant of success or the jailer of potential, depending entirely on what it is fed. To rewire the subconscious is not to wish, hope, or fantasize. It is to wage a disciplined psychological campaign against the habits of thought that have governed you unconsciously. It is to replace emotionalized doubt with emotionalized belief. It is to deliberately assume control over the inner dialogue that most people allow to run on autopilot. This is why success, as Hill taught it, is first an internal conquest. Before wealth appears in form, it must be formed in mind. Before confidence appears in behavior, it must be installed in belief. Before persistence shows itself in action, it must be rooted in identity. The first and most critical law in this rewiring process is definiteness of purpose. The subconscious mind cannot move toward a vague destination. It requires clarity so precise that it leaves no room for confusion. Most people say they want success, but success is not a destination. It is a word so broad that it paralyzes action. The subconscious mind responds to specifics, not abstractions. When purpose is undefined, the mind drifts. When the mind drifts, it becomes vulnerable to fear, suggestion, and outside influence. Drift is not neutral. Drift always moves toward limitation. Hill warned repeatedly that drifting is the most common cause of failure because it masquerades as harmless indecision. But indecision is poison to the subconscious. When you do not decide, you invite the world to decide for you. When you do not define your purpose, your environment defines it through necessity, fear, and convenience. The subconscious then aligns your behavior with survival rather than achievement. You work to avoid pain instead of pursuing purpose. You seek security instead of growth. You trade vision for comfort. To rewire the subconscious, purpose must be burned into it with such intensity that it becomes the dominant organizing principle of your life. This does not happen through casual intention. It happens through emotionalized repetition. Hill taught that a purpose written once and forgotten has no power. A purpose repeated daily with feeling becomes a command. When you impress a clear aim upon the subconscious, It begins to reorganize perception. Opportunities become visible that were previously invisible. Ideas surface spontaneously. Decisions become faster because they are filtered through a single criterion. Does this move me toward my aim or away from it? But purpose alone is insufficient without burning desire. Desire, as Hill defined it, is not wishful thinking. It is not preference. It is not hope. It is a state of emotional urgency so intense that the mind becomes unwilling to accept failure as a permanent outcome. Desire is the heat that forges belief. Without desire, affirmations are hollow. Without desire, autosuggestion is mechanical. Without desire, persistence collapses at the first sign of resistance. Most people underestimate the role of emotion in shaping the subconscious. The subconscious does not respond to words alone. It responds to feeling. You can repeat 1,000 affirmations without effect if they carry no emotional charge, but a single emotionally intense experience can rewire belief in an instant. This is why fear is so powerful. Fear is emotion saturated with imagery and repetition. Hill understood that desire must be cultivated with the same intensity that fear is cultivated unconsciously. Burning desire is created by linking your purpose to something deeply personal, something that reaches beyond material reward into identity, meaning, and self-respect. When your aim becomes tied to who you believe you are and who you refuse to remain, desire becomes self-sustaining. The subconscious begins to defend it. Doubt feels like a threat. Procrastination feels like betrayal. Effort becomes natural rather than forced. Faith is the next law, and it is perhaps the most misunderstood. Faith, in Hill's philosophy, is not religious belief. It is the psychological state produced when desire is combined with repeated autosuggestion until the subconscious accepts the desired outcome as inevitable. Faith is not blind. It is constructed. It is built through disciplined mental rehearsal and emotional repetition. The subconscious does not distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. This is why persistent visualization, when combined with feeling, alters behavior. The mind begins to act as if the outcome is already in motion. Faith eliminates hesitation. Hesitation is the mental friction that wastes energy and delays action. When faith is installed, action becomes decisive because the subconscious no longer questions whether effort is worthwhile. It assumes success as a working premise. This assumption changes posture, tone, and behavior in subtle ways that others respond to. Confidence is felt before it is proven. Authority is sensed before it is justified. Opportunity is attracted to certainty because certainty signals direction. Autosuggestion is the mechanism through which faith is installed. Hill emphasized that the subconscious is most receptive when the conscious mind is relaxed, focused, and emotionally engaged. Words spoken without attention are useless. Words spoken with feeling and repetition become instructions. Autosuggestion is not magic. It is training. It is the deliberate practice of replacing destructive inner dialogue with constructive commands. Most people practice autosuggestion unconsciously, but in reverse. They repeat worries, they rehearse failure, they narrate limitations, they describe themselves as tired, unlucky, overwhelmed, or incapable. Each repetition strengthens the pattern. The subconscious accepts the story and produces behavior that confirms it. To rewire the subconscious, this process must be reversed with discipline and patience. Persistence is the test that separates those who rewire their subconscious from those who merely experiment with ideas. The subconscious resists change initially because familiar patterns feel safe. Doubt resurfaces. Old habits attempt to reassert control. This is where most people quit. Hill observed that the majority give up just before the mental shift occurs. Persistence is not stubbornness. It is loyalty to purpose in the absence of immediate evidence. It is the refusal to allow temporary defeat to harden into permanent belief. Each time you persist, despite discomfort, the subconscious receives a powerful signal. This identity is non-negotiable. Over time, resistance weakens. New patterns stabilize. What once required effort becomes automatic. This is the true rewiring. When disciplined behavior becomes instinctive, Success stops feeling like strain and starts feeling like alignment. Self-discipline binds all these laws together. Without self-discipline, desire scatters, faith wavers. Autosuggestion becomes inconsistent. Persistence collapses. Discipline is not punishment. It is self-respect in action. It is the ability to act in accordance with purpose rather than mood. The subconscious observes behavior more closely than words. When actions align with declared aims, belief strengthens. When actions contradict intention, belief erodes. Fear mastery is essential because fear is the primary tool through which old patterns defend themselves. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of loss, fear of inadequacy all originate in the subconscious as protective mechanisms. Hill taught that fear is not eliminated by avoidance but by understanding and replacement. Fear loses power when it is named, examined, and countered with faith-based action. Each time you act in the presence of fear, the subconscious updates TS assessment. What once felt dangerous begins to feel survivable, then manageable, then irrelevant. Imagination is the workshop of the mind. Every achievement begins as an image held in consciousness before it becomes a fact. The subconscious uses imagination as a blueprint. When imagination is left undirected, it produces anxiety. When it is deliberately guided, it produces vision. Hill distinguished between synthetic imagination, which rearranges existing ideas, and creative imagination, which receives insight from the subconscious. Both are activated through focused desire and relaxed concentration. Decision is the final seal. Indecision fractures energy. Decision concentrates it. The subconscious responds immediately to firm decisions because they eliminate ambiguity. When you decide with finality, the mind stops negotiating. Action follows. Hill noted that successful people make decisions quickly and change them slowly, while unsuccessful people do the opposite. This is not coincidence, it is psychological efficiency. Behind all these laws operate invisible mental forces. Thought vibrations, emotional states, and belief patterns interact with environment in ways that are subtle but consistent. You attract what you are mentally prepared to receive. You notice what aligns with your dominant thoughts. You repel what contradicts your self-concept. This is not superstition. It is selective perception guided by subconscious expectation. To rewire your subconscious is to take responsibility at a level most people avoid. It is to accept that every result is preceded by a mental cause. It is to abandon the comfort of excuses and embrace the discipline of deliberate thought. This process is demanding because it leaves no room for victimhood, but it is also liberating because it places power exactly where it belongs within. This is only the beginning. The foundation has been laid, the mind has been exposed, the laws have been revealed. What follows will demand even greater honesty, greater intensity, and greater commitment. Because once you see the mechanism, you can no longer claim ignorance. The question is no longer whether the subconscious can be rewired. The question is whether you are willing to confront the version of yourself that has been silently shaping your life and decide without retreat that it will no longer do so unchecked. The moment you accept that the subconscious mind has been governing your results without your permission, a new responsibility emerges, one that most people instinctively resist. It is the responsibility of control. Control not in the sense of force, but in the sense of authorship. Napoleon Hill made it clear that the greatest tragedy of human existence is not poverty, illness, or failure, but drifting through life without conscious direction, allowing inherited beliefs and emotional habits to dictate destiny. Once awareness is established, ignorance is no longer an excuse. From that point forward, every thought entertained becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. The subconscious does not change through intellectual agreement alone. Understanding these laws does not rewire anything. Insight without action is powerless. The subconscious is impressed only by what is repeated with emotion and reinforced by behavior. This is why so many people read books, watch lectures, listen to speeches, and feel inspired for a moment only to return to the same patterns. Inspiration is fleeting if it is not converted into ritual. The subconscious responds to ritual, to rhythm, to consistency. It learns through repetition, not revelation. Hill observed that the mind operates in habits, and habits are nothing more than thoughts that have been repeated so often they have become automatic. The subconscious is conservative by nature. It prefers the familiar, even when the familiar produces pain. This explains why people remain loyal to identities that sabotage them. The known feels safer than the unknown. To rewire the subconscious, you must deliberately create new habits of thought that feel foreign at first. This discomfort is not a sign of failure, it is evidence of change. One of the most dangerous illusions is the belief that the subconscious can be reprogrammed passively. There is no passive transformation. The process demands vigilance. Every thought you allow to linger is either reinforcing the old pattern or feeding the new one. Neutrality does not exist. Hill warned that the hum and mind is like a garden. If you do not cultivate it intentionally, weeds will grow automatically. Weeds do not require effort. Purpose does. This is where mental discipline becomes non-negotiable. Mental discipline is the ability to observe your own thinking without being enslaved by it. Most people believe they are their thoughts. Hill understood that thoughts are tools, and like any tool, they must be selected deliberately. When fear arises, the undisciplined mind accepts it as truth. The disciplined mind examines it as a signal. When doubt speaks, the undisciplined mind obeys. The disciplined mind challenges. The subconscious is shaped not only by what you think, but by what you emotionally agree with. Agreement is the key. You may consciously reject an idea, but if you emotionally rehearse it, the subconscious accepts it. This is why worrying is so destructive. Worry is faith in negative outcomes. It is imagination used against the self. Hill taught that the same mental faculty that creates success can just as efficiently create failure when misdirected. The difference is not ability, but control. To gain control, you must understand the role of emotional dominance. The subconscious is always being impressed by the strongest emotion present. This means that in moments of emotional intensity, beliefs are installed rapidly. Trauma installs fear. Success installs confidence. Repetition installs habit. If you are not intentionally creating emotional experiences that align with your purpose, life will create them for you, often through pain. This is why Hill placed such emphasis on emotionalized autosuggestion. Words alone are weak. Words combined with feeling are commands. When you speak your purpose aloud with conviction, when you visualize it with detail and emotion, when you attach it to pride, urgency, and self-respect, the subconscious begins to respond. It does not respond immediately because it must override existing patterns, but it responds inevitably if the input remains consistent. Consistency is the language of the subconscious. Sporadic effort produces sporadic belief. Sporadic belief produces inconsistent action. The subconscious learns from what you do repeatedly, not from what you intend occasionally. This is why discipline outweighs motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline persists. Hill understood that self-discipline is the bridge between desire and its realization. Without it, desire decays into fantasy. The rewiring process requires you to become ruthless with internal dialogue. Every inner statement is either constructing or corroding belief. Saying "I'll try" is not harmless. It is a confession of doubt. Saying "this is difficult" is not neutral. It is an emotional instruction. The subconscious does not parse nuance. It accepts the emotional meaning behind the words. To speak powerfully to yourself is not arrogance. It is self-leadership. At this stage, resistance intensifies. Old patterns fight for survival. You may feel mental fatigue, emotional pushback, or sudden distractions. Hill described this as the point where most people retreat, mistaking resistance for a sign they are doing something wrong. In reality, resistance is proof that the subconscious is being challenged. No system changes without friction. Comfort is the signal of stagnation, not growth. Persistence through this phase is critical. Each day you maintain focus despite discomfort. You weaken the old neural pathways and strengthen the new ones. The subconscious begins to associate effort with identity. You are no longer someone who tries, you are someone who acts. This shift is subtle but profound. Once identity changes, behavior follows naturally. You no longer need to force yourself. You need only to be consistent with who you believe you are. Hill emphasized that belief is not created by evidence. Evidence is created by belief. Waiting for proof before committing is the logic of mediocrity. The subconscious must be convinced before results appear, not after. This is why faith precedes achievement. Faith is the decision to act as if the outcome is inevitable, even when appearances suggest otherwise. This decision reorganizes behavior in ways that eventually produce the evidence you were waiting for. Fear must be confronted directly in this process, not avoided. Fear is the guardian of the old identity. It exists to keep you within familiar boundaries. Hill identified 6 basic fears that dominate the subconscious. Poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. These fears operate beneath awareness, shaping decisions in subtle ways. They whisper caution when boldness is required. They magnify risk and minimize reward. They sabotage initiative. To rewire the subconscious, fear must be exposed and reinterpreted. Fear is not an enemy. It is misdirected imagination. When you imagine failure vividly, fear follows. When you imagine success vividly, confidence emerges. The subconscious does not distinguish between the two. It responds to imagery and emotion. By deliberately visualizing successful outcomes and rehearsing composed responses to adversity, you train the subconscious to associate challenge with capability rather than danger. Self-discipline in thought leads to self-discipline in action. Action reinforces belief faster than thought alone. Each decisive action taken in alignment with purpose sends a powerful message to the subconscious, "This is who I am now." Each avoided action sends the opposite message, "There is no neutral action. Everything counts." Hill taught that small acts of discipline compound into unshakable confidence over time. Confidence is not a personality trait. It is a byproduct of kept promises to oneself. Imagination must now be elevated from fantasy to strategy. Creative imagination, as Hill described it, operates when the conscious mind is relaxed and focused. This is when insights emerge, connections form, and solutions appear without force. This faculty is activated through purposeful thinking and emotional calm. Anxiety blocks it. Desperation distorts it. Faith unlocks it. When you trust the process, the subconscious begins to cooperate creatively. Decision-making becomes sharper as belief stabilizes. Indecision is mental chaos. Decision is mental order. When you decide firmly, the subconscious aligns resources accordingly. Energy that was previously wasted on doubt is redirected toward execution. Hill observed that successful individuals do not wait for perfect conditions. They decide, then adjust. This decisiveness communicates authority to the subconscious and to others. Authority attracts cooperation. The invisible forces Hill spoke of are not mystical abstractions. They are the cumulative effects of belief, emotion, perception, and action interacting with environment. When your subconscious expects opportunity, you notice it. When it expects rejection, you anticipate it and unconsciously provoke it. The world responds not to what you say you want, but to what you believe you deserve. Deserving is a subconscious calculation. As this rewiring continues, you begin to experience internal alignment. Thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction. Inner conflict diminishes. Energy increases. Focus sharpens. This is not excitement. It is resolve. Resolve is calm, controlled, and relentless. Hill described this state as the quiet confidence of someone who knows where they are going and refuses to negotiate with doubt. But this alignment is fragile if not protected. The environment constantly attempts to reimpose old beliefs through opinion, criticism, and comparison. Most people relapse not because they lack discipline, but because they expose their evolving mindset to hostile influence. Hill advised selective association. The subconscious absorbs not only your thoughts, but the emotional atmosphere you inhabit. Surroundings matter. Conversations matter. Inputs matter. To continue rewiring, you must become the gatekeeper of your mental environment. This is not isolation. It is selectivity. You do not need approval from those who do not share your purpose. You need coherence. Coherence between aim, belief, and action. Every time you compromise this coherence to appease doubt, you weaken the new pattern. At this stage, patience becomes essential. Impatience is disbelief disguised as urgency. The subconscious operates on its own timeline, governed by repetition and reinforcement. Forcing outcomes creates tension. Tension disrupts clarity. Clarity sustains progress. Hill emphasized that time is an ally when faith is present. When faith is absent, time becomes an enemy. This is the deep work. This is the unseen battle. No one applauds this phase. No one validates it. The reward is not external praise, but internal authority. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to rely on your own judgment. You begin to move without waiting for permission. This is the foundation of leadership, whether of others or of your own life. The subconscious is now being reshaped, but the process is not complete. What comes next will demand an even higher standard of honesty, because once belief stabilizes, the final obstacle emerges: responsibility without excuse. The mind will attempt to cling to old justifications. It will search for exceptions. It will test your commitment. The question is no longer whether change is possible. The question is whether you are willing to embody it without retreat, without negotiation, and without the safety net of old identities that once defined you. There comes a point in this process where the subconscious stops resisting and starts testing. This is a critical distinction that few recognize. Resistance is passive. Testing is active. When the subconscious senses that you are serious, that repetition has not weakened, that discipline has not collapsed, it begins to present scenarios designed to measure whether this new identity is permanent or provisional. Old temptations resurface. Old fears whisper with renewed sophistication. External circumstances seem to contradict internal conviction. This is not punishment, it is calibration. Napoleon Hill understood that the subconscious mind does not fully commit to a new pattern until it is convinced that the pattern will not be abandoned under pressure. This is why so many transformations collapse just as momentum builds. The individual mistakes testing for failure and retreats, reinforcing the old belief that change is temporary and comfort is safer. The subconscious records this retreat as evidence and tightens its grip on familiar limitations. To continue rewiring, you must recognize this phase for what it is: initiation. The subconscious is asking a single question in countless forms. Are you committed only when conditions are favorable, or are you committed because this is who you are now? Your answer is not spoken. It is demonstrated. At this stage, self-discipline evolves into self-command. Discipline is effortful. Command is natural. Discipline says you must force yourself to act. Command says action is inevitable because it aligns with identity. Hill taught that the highest form of self-discipline is not restraint, but direction. When purpose is clear and belief is stable, discipline becomes less about denying impulses and more about channeling energy. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are leading yourself. This internal leadership is built through unwavering consistency in small decisions. The subconscious is less impressed by grand declarations than by quiet reliability. Each time you follow through when no one is watching, you send a signal of authority inward. Each time you compromise privately, you undermine that authority. Confidence erodes not from public failure, but from private betrayal of standards. Standards are the invisible framework of character. They are the rules you enforce when excuses would be easy. Hill emphasized that successful individuals operate by personal laws, not moods. Moods are temporary. Laws are permanent. When you establish internal laws regarding effort, honesty, focus, and persistence, the subconscious aligns behavior accordingly. Without laws, the mind negotiates endlessly. Negotiation breeds delay. Delay breeds doubt. Fear attempts to reassert itself here in more refined forms. It no longer screams. It reasons. It presents logic that sounds intelligent and responsible. It suggests waiting for better timing, gathering more information, avoiding unnecessary risk. These suggestions are not inherently wrong. They are dangerous when they serve as disguises for avoidance. Hill warned that fear often wears the mask of common sense. To master fear at this level, you must separate caution from cowardice. Caution is strategic. Cowardice is protective of comfort. The subconscious responds to courage because courage redefines safety. Each time you act decisively in spite of fear, the subconscious updates its definition of danger. What once triggered hesitation begins to trigger readiness. This is not recklessness, it is recalibration. Imagination becomes increasingly powerful during this phase because belief has stabilized enough to support vivid mental rehearsal. Visualization is no longer forced. It becomes immersive. You see yourself acting with competence. You feel the emotional tone of success. You anticipate challenges without anxiety because you trust your capacity to respond. Hill described this as the stage where creative imagination begins to cooperate willingly, offering insights rather than obstacles. These insights often arrive unexpectedly during moments of rest rather than effort. This is because the subconscious works most effectively when the conscious mind is not interfering. Obsession blocks creativity. Trust invites it. When you have impressed your aim deeply enough, solutions surface spontaneously. This does not mean effort ceases. It means effort becomes more intelligent. Decision-making sharpens further as identity consolidates. You begin to recognize distractions quickly. You sense misalignment immediately. Choices that once required debate now feel obvious. This clarity is not arrogance, it is coherence. When thoughts, emotions, and purpose align, decisions lose friction. Hill observed that clarity is the byproduct of definiteness, not intelligence. External feedback may become contradictory at this stage. Some people will encourage you. Others will doubt you. Some will admire your resolve. Others will feel threatened by it. This reaction is not about you. It is about contrast. When someone embodies discipline, it exposes the lack of it in others. The subconscious of those around you reacts defensively. Hill advised emotional detachment from opinion. Opinion is noise. Purpose is signal. To protect the rewiring process, emotional boundaries must be strengthened. This does not mean indifference. It means discernment. You must decide whose voice has authority in your life. Authority is granted, not taken. When you grant authority to those who do not share your vision, you invite confusion. Confusion weakens belief. Belief requires clarity. This is also where patience is tested most severely. Progress may appear slow. External results may lag behind internal transformation. This delay is not a sign of failure, it is structural. The subconscious must first reconfigure behavior patterns before outcomes change. Hill stressed that impatience is one of the most destructive habits because it erodes faith just before results materialize. Faith is sustained by understanding the process, not by demanding immediate proof. During this phase, the temptation to measure progress externally must be resisted. External measurement encourages comparison. Comparison breeds insecurity. Insecurity destabilizes belief. The correct measure is internal consistency. Are you thinking differently? Are you responding differently? Are you acting with greater control? These are the true indicators of rewiring. As self-command strengthens, effort becomes less dramatic. You stop needing emotional highs to act. You stop relying on motivation. Action becomes routine. This is where many people lose interest because drama disappears. But drama was never the path to mastery. Calm consistency is. Hill describes success as a habit, not an event. The subconscious now begins to expect follow-through. This expectation creates momentum. Momentum reduces resistance. Resistance consumes energy. Energy conserved becomes focus. Focus compounds results. This compounding effect is subtle but relentless. Small improvements accumulate into significant transformation over time. At this level, responsibility deepens. You can no longer blame circumstances without dishonesty. You can no longer attribute failure solely to external factors. This is uncomfortable because it removes escape routes, but it is also empowering because it consolidates control. Hill taught that responsibility is the price of power. Those unwilling to pay it remain dependent on chance. This responsibility extends to emotional regulation. Emotional reactions are no longer justified by triggers. They are recognized as choices. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means directing it. Anger becomes fuel. Disappointment becomes information. Fear becomes focus. Emotion is energy. Energy must be directed or it will dissipate. The subconscious responds powerfully to emotional mastery because mastery signals authority. Authority stabilizes identity. Identity drives behavior. Behavior shapes results. This chain is now operating intentionally rather than accidentally. You are no longer reacting to life. You are designing response. As this design becomes habitual, you experience a shift in self-perception. You no longer see yourself as someone becoming disciplined. You see yourself as someone who is disciplined. This distinction is critica. Becoming implies uncertainty. Being implies finality. The subconscious aligns with being. Once you identify as disciplined, actions that contradict discipline feel foreign. Hill emphasized that identity is the strongest force in human psychology. People will abandon goals before abandoning identity. This is why rewiring the subconscious must culminate in identity transformation. Goals can change. Identity endures. When identity aligns with purpose, success becomes inevitable because deviation feels unnatural, but identity must be reinforced continuously. Neglect invites decay. Old patterns wait patiently for opportunity. Vigilance is required not out of fear, but out of respect for the process. Respect sustains commitment. Commitment sustains progress. You are now operating from a position of internal authority, but authority carries obligation. You must now act consistently with the standards you have established. There is no turning back without consequence. The subconscious has accepted the new command structure. Betrayal at this stage is more damaging than earlier because belief has been invested. What remains is refinement, precision, integration. The final obstacles are subtle, not obvious. Complacency, ego, overconfidence. These can quietly erode discipline if left unchecked. Hill warned that success carries its own dangers because it tempts the mind into relaxation. Relaxation invites drift. Drift dismantles purpose. To continue forward, humility must balance. Confidence. Humility not as self-doubt, but as respect for law. The laws of success do not bend for anyone. They reward alignment and punish neglect impartially. Understanding this keeps the mind sharp and disciplined. The subconscious is now an ally rather than an adversary, but allies require leadership. Leadership requires vision. Vision requires renewal. The work is ongoing. Mastery is never complete. It is maintained. What comes next will require you to confront not resistance, but refinement. Not fear, but responsibility at a higher level. The mind has been rewired enough to move forward, but now it must be hardened, focused, and purified of subtle weaknesses that only appear once momentum has been established. This is where many fall, not because they cannot begin, but because they underestimate the demands of continuation. Once momentum has been established, a new danger emerges that is far more deceptive than fear or doubt. It is comfort. Comfort is not relaxation, it is not rest. It is the subtle belief that the work is mostly done, that vigilance can soften, that intensity can be reduced without consequence. Napoleon Hill warned that comfort is the breeding ground of drift, and drift is the silent killer of purpose. Drift does not announce itself as failure. It disguises itself as balance, as moderation, as reasonableness. It whispers that you have earned ease, that you can afford delay, that discipline can be loosened without cost. The subconscious responds to comfort by reverting to efficiency rather than growth. Efficiency feels productive, but it is maintenance, not expansion. Growth requires tension. Expansion requires pressure. When pressure is removed prematurely, the subconscious interprets it as a signal that the new identity is negotiable. Negotiability weakens command. Command weakens results. This is why Hill insisted that success demands continuous application of principle, not periodic enthusiasm. At this stage, self-discipline must evolve again. Earlier, discipline was about forcing action despite resistance. Later, it became self-command rooted in identity. Now it must become self-regulation under success. This is the rarest form of discipline because it is exercised without crisis. It requires acting with the same precision and intensity when things are working as when they were not. Most people relax when progress appears. The disciplined individual sharpens focus. The subconscious is always learning from behavior. When you act with precision only under pressure, it learns that discipline is conditional. When you act with consistency regardless of circumstance, it learns that discipline is law. Laws do not depend on mood or outcome. They operate continuously. Hill understood that the mind respects law because law creates predictability. Predictability stabilizes belief. Belief sustains action. This is where the role of purpose must be revisited and refined. Purpose is not static. It deepens as identity expands. A purpose defined at an earlier level of awareness may no longer be sufficient to sustain intensity. If purpose does not evolve, desire weakens. Weak desire invites distraction. Distraction fractures focus. Focus dilution erodes momentum. To prevent this, purpose must be re-examined and intensified. Hill taught that a purpose connected only to personal gain will eventually lose power. Gain satisfies, meaning sustains. As the subconscious adapts to higher levels of performance, it requires deeper justification. Why this path? Why this standard? Why this level of effort? When these questions are answered at a deeper level, desire renews itself. When they are ignored, fatigue emerges. Fatigue at this stage is not physical, it is psychological. It is the exhaustion of repetition without renewal of meaning. The remedy is not rest alone, but reconnection. Reconnection to vision, reconnection to consequence, reconnection to the cost of abandoning the path. Hill emphasized that clarity of consequence strengthens persistence. When the mind clearly sees what is lost by quitting, commitment hardens. Imagination now becomes a tool not only for creation, but for preservation. You must vividly imagine the regression that comfort invites, the return of old habits, the erosion of self-respect, the quiet disappointment of unrealized potential. This is not pessimism, it is strategic realism. The subconscious responds strongly to negative imagery when it is framed as consequence rather than fear. It strengthens resolve. At the same time, imagination must continue to project forward not just to outcomes, but to standards of being. You are no longer merely imagining success. You are imagining consistency at a higher level. You are visualizing yourself operating with precision under boredom, under routine, under predictability. This is advanced mental training. Most people only imagine peak moments. Masters imagine maintenance. Decision-making at this level becomes more subtle. The choices are no longer between obvious right and wrong. They are between good and excellent, between necessary and optimal, between easy progress and disciplined growth. The subconscious must be trained to choose long-term alignment over short-term relief. This training occurs through conscious refusal of small compromises. Small compromises are the preferred entry point of drift, skipped rituals, softened standards, delayed execution. None of these appear dangerous alone. Together they dismantle structure. Hill warned that failure rarely arrives through dramatic collapse. It arrives through gradual neglect. The subconscious absorbs neglect as permission. Permission becomes pattern. Pattern becomes outcome. To counter this, ritual must be protected. Ritual is the physical expression of identity. It anchors belief in behavior. When rituals are maintained, regardless of mood, the subconscious remains aligned. When rituals are abandoned under the excuse of flexibility, alignment weakens. Discipline must be ritualized to survive success. Fear at this stage transforms again. It is no longer fear of failure. It becomes fear of responsibility. Success expands influence. Influence magnifies consequence. With greater capability comes greater accountability. The subconscious may attempt to avoid this by unconsciously sabotaging momentum. This sabotage often appears as procrastination on next-level actions. Hill understood that many fear success more than failure because success demands consistency at a higher standard. To master this fear, responsibility must be embraced deliberately. You must accept that growth will demand more of you, not less. More precision, more restraint, more leadership of self. The subconscious must be trained to associate expansion with strength rather than burden. This association is built through progressive assumption of responsibility and successful management of it. Self-command now requires humility. Not humility as self-doubt, but humility as obedience to principle. Principles do not care about ego. Ego seeks recognition. Principle seeks alignment. When ego dominates, shortcuts appear attractive. When principle dominates, shortcuts feel dangerous. Hill emphasized that pride precedes collapse because it invites negligence. Negligence is subtle. It appears as confidence without verification, action without reflection, speed without structure. The subconscious, once confident, may push toward efficiency at the expense of accuracy. Accuracy must be protected. Precision must be valued over haste. Haste satisfies ego. Precision satisfies purpose. At this level, the environment reacts more strongly to you. Expectations increase, demands multiply, distractions intensify. This is not coincidence. Growth attracts complexity. The subconscious must be trained to filter complexity without fragmentation. Fragmentation scatters energy. Scattered energy weakens execution. Focus must now be refined rather than intensified. Early focus is about elimination of obvious distractions. Advanced focus is about prioritization among worthy options. The subconscious must learn to say no to good opportunities in service of the right ones. This requires clarity of hierarchy. What matters most? What advances purpose most directly? What sustains long-term alignment? Hill taught that successful individuals are not those who do many things well, but those who do a few things exceptionally well with consistency. Exceptionality requires sacrifice. Sacrifice must be chosen consciously, or it will be imposed unconsciously through burnout or failure. Choosing sacrifice strengthens autonomy. Imposed sacrifice breeds resentment. Emotional mastery now involves regulation of satisfaction. Satisfaction must not become complacency. Gratitude must not become relaxation. Appreciation must coexist with hunger. Hunger not for validation, but for refinement. Refinement is the continuous improvement of process, not the chasing of novelty. The subconscious thrives on novelty initially, but stability sustains growth. At this stage, novelty must be introduced strategically rather than impulsively. Learning deepens, skills are sharpened, understanding becomes layered. This depth produces confidence that is quiet, not loud. Quiet confidence is resilient. Loud confidence seeks reassurance. As confidence quiets, identity solidifies further. You no longer need to announce who you are becoming, you demonstrate it. Demonstration reinforces belief more powerfully than declaration. The subconscious respects evidence. Evidence is produced by consistency over time. Time now becomes an ally rather than an adversary. Earlier, time tested patience. Now, time compounds discipline. Each day of maintained standard strengthens identity. Identity stability reduces internal conflict. Reduced conflict frees energy. Freed energy increases capacity, but capacity must be directed. Undirected capacity invites chaos. Direction requires continual clarity of purpose. Purpose must be reviewed, reaffirmed, and recommitted to regularly. This is not repetition for comfort. It is recalibration for accuracy. You are now operating at a level where mistakes are less frequent but more consequential. Attention to detail becomes critical. Neglecting small signals can produce large disruptions. The subconscious must be trained to notice early indicators of drift and correct immediately. Correction must be swift and unemotional. Emotion delays correction. Delay amplifies error. This level demands honesty without self-punishment. Errors are information, not identity. The disciplined mind corrects without drama. Drama wastes energy. Energy must be conserved for execution. As this phase stabilizes, you begin to experience a sense of inevitability. Not arrogance, certainty. Certainty rooted in process rather than outcome. You trust your systems, you trust your standards, you trust your ability to respond. This trust is earned through repetition and regulation, but inevitability must not become assumption. Assumption invites neglect. Respect for process must remain intact. Hill warned that the moment one believes the laws no longer require attention is the moment the laws withdraw their support. The subconscious has been rewired to operate at a higher level, but it must now be protected from erosion. Protection does not mean isolation. It means governance, governance of thought, governance of behavior, governance of environment. What remains is integration, the alignment of all faculties into a single unified direction. Desire, faith, discipline, imagination, decision, persistence, and responsibility must operate as one system rather than separate efforts. This integration is the final preparation before full expression. The mind is now capable. The identity is now established. The habits are now embedded. What follows will demand not construction, but total ownership. Ownership without excuse, ownership without retreat. Oh, ownership without compromise. This is where the inner conquest must be finalized, because the final test of the subconscious is not whether you can build power, but whether you can carry it without distortion. When integration begins, the subconscious no longer operates as a collection of separate functions, but as a unified command center. Desire does not pull in one direction while discipline pulls in another. Faith does not surge while action hesitates. Everything moves together. This is the state Napoleon Hill described often indirectly as harmony of purpose. Harmony is not calmness, it is coordination. It is the elimination of internal contradiction. And internal contradiction is the greatest drain on human power. Most people are exhausted not because they work too hard, but because they are divided within themselves. One part wants growth, another wants safety. One part wants discipline, another wants comfort. One part wants truth, another wants approval. The subconscious absorbs this conflict and produces hesitation, inconsistency, and self-sabotage. Integration resolves this by establishing a single ruling intent. When one intent governs thought, emotion, and action, energy stops leaking. This is where the rewiring process becomes irreversible if maintained. Not because change is impossible, but because regression becomes psychologically painful. Acting against alignment now produces discomfort. Compromise feels wrong. Drift feels unnatural. The subconscious has accepted a higher standard of identity and will resist being lowered. This is the turning point most people never reach because it requires enduring the long stretch of effort without applause. At this level, persistence is no longer driven by desperation or urgency. It is driven by inevitability. You persist because stopping no longer makes sense. The idea of quitting feels irrational. Hill taught that persistence is sustained not by willpower, but by belief that has been proven internally. You are no longer convincing yourself that the path works. You know it does because you have become different. This internal proof is subtle. It appears in how you respond to setbacks. Setbacks no longer threaten identity. They become operational problems. Emotional reaction shortens. Analysis replaces drama. Correction replaces complaint. The subconscious now interprets obstacles as part of the process rather than evidence of inadequacy. This shift alone separates those who plateau from those who continue rising. Faith at this stage is no longer fragile. It does not require constant reinforcement through affirmation. It exists as an underlying assumption. You expect competence from yourself. You expect progress over time. You expect solutions to emerge with effort. These expectations shape perception. You notice options others overlook. You detect leverage points. You anticipate second-order consequences. This is the practical expression of the invisible mental forces Hill spoke of. You are not attracting outcomes mystically. You are aligning perception and behavior with opportunity so consistently that results appear inevitable to outsiders. They call it luck. You recognize it as preparation meeting circumstance. Autosuggestion now functions differently. It is no longer primarily about installing belief. It is about maintaining precision. The inner dialogue becomes quieter but sharper. You speak to yourself less often but with greater authority. Self-talk becomes instruction rather than encouragement. This is the voice of self-command. Self-command manifests most clearly in how you handle temptation. Temptation does not disappear. It evolves. Early temptation is obvious, distraction, procrastination, avoidance. Advanced temptation is subtle, overconfidence, unnecessary expansion, indulgence disguised as reward. The subconscious must be trained to recognize these not as pleasures, but as risks to alignment. Hill warned that many people fail after initial success because they mistake reward for permission. Reward is acknowledgement, not exemption. You may rest, but you do not abandon ritual. You may enjoy, but you do not disengage. The line between renewal and neglect must be guarded carefully. Renewal strengthens capacity. Neglect weakens structure. Structure is now everything. Structure not imposed from outside, but designed from within. Your days have rhythm. Your efforts have sequence. Your decisions have criteria. This structure frees creativity ray further than limiting it because it removes chaos. The subconscious thrives in structured environments. Structure reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty conserves energy. Energy conservation at this stage becomes a strategic priority. You no longer expend energy proving yourself to others. You no longer argue unnecessarily. You no longer chase validation. All of these drain focus. Focus must be preserved for execution and refinement. Hill emphasized that scattered energy is wasted power. As integration deepens, imagination becomes increasingly constructive and less reactive. You no longer imagine worst-case scenarios habitually. You imagine contingencies calmly. You prepare without panic. You visualize success without attachment. This detachment is not indifference. It is maturity. You are committed to the process, not obsessed with the outcome. Obsession distorts judgment. Commitment sharpens it. The subconscious now understands the difference because it has experienced both. Obsession is rooted in insecurity. Commitment is rooted in identity. Identity does not beg for results. It produces them. Decision-making becomes almost instantaneous in many situations because alignment has reduced internal debate. Debate only occurs when values conflict. When values are integrated, choice is obvious. This speed is not recklessness, it is clarity. Hill noted that decisiveness is one of the most reliable indicators of success because it reflects internal order product. External credibility. People respond differently to you now. They sense certainty. They sense boundaries. They sense that you are not easily swayed. This is not intimidation. It is presence. Presence is the natural byproduct of alignment. You do not need to demand respect. Respect follows coherence. With this presence comes increased responsibility. Others may depend on your decisions. Your actions may influence outcomes beyond yourself. The subconscious must now be trained to carry this weight without distortion. Distortion occurs when ego seeks control rather than stewardship. Control is brittle. Stewardship is resilient. Hill believed that leadership begins with self-mastery and matures into service. Service not as sacrifice of self, but as application of strength. When your purpose extends beyond personal gain, discipline stabilizes further. You are no longer negotiating effort based on mood. You are honoring obligation. Obligation, when chosen consciously, becomes a source of strength. It anchors behavior during periods of uncertainty. The subconscious responds powerfully to obligation because it provides meaning. Meaning sustains effort when motivation fades. At this level, fear resurfaces one final time, not as fear of failure or success, but as fear of permanence. Permanence removes escape. Permanence demands consistency over a lifetime. The mind may recoil from this responsibility. It may long for the option to quit. Hill understood that this fear is the last barrier between potential and destiny. To cross it, you must accept that there is no return to unconscious living without cost. You have seen too much. You have changed too deeply. Attempting to live beneath your standard now produces inner conflict. This conflict is the price of awareness. It is also the proof of growth. Persistence now becomes loyalty to self, not stubbornness, but integrity. Integrity is alignment maintained under all conditions. The subconscious equates integrity with safety because it eliminates internal contradiction. When integrity is intact, stress decreases even as responsibility increases. This is the paradox Hill hinted at repeatedly. Disciplined living feels freer than undisciplined living because it removes chaos. Chaos creates anxiety. Order creates calm. Calm allows sustained effort. Sustained effort produces mastery. Mastery is not dominance over others. It is dominance over impulse, fear, distraction, and doubt. This dominance is quiet. It does not announce itself. It expresses itself through reliability. Reliability builds trust. Trust multiplies opportunity. Opportunity now appears differently. It is no longer sought aggressively. T is evaluated selectively. You understand that not all opportunity is advancement. Some opportunity is diversion. The subconscious must be trained to discern between the two. Discernment comes from clarity of long-term vision. Vision at this stage is less about specific outcomes and more about standards of operation. How do you move through challenge? How do you respond to pressure? How do you maintain alignment when conditions change? These questions guide behavior more effectively than external targets. Targets can be adjusted. Standards must not be compromised. Hill taught that those who build their lives on standards rather than circumstances are immune to most forms of failure. Failure requires collapse of standard. As long as standard holds, adjustment is possible. Adjustment now becomes a skill rather than a reaction. You adjust strategy without questioning identity. You refine process without doubting purpose. You pivot without panic. The subconscious remains stable during change because it trusts the underlying framework. This stability produces endurance. Endurance is the capacity to remain effective over time. Many can surge briefly. Few can sustain. Sustainability is built here through integration, regulation, and respect for law. Law, in Hill's philosophy, is impersonal and exact. It does not reward intention alone. It rewards alignment expressed through consistent behavior. Understanding this removes entitlement. You do not expect reward without effort. Do not resent effort without immediate reward. You trust the law because you have tested it internally. This trust allows patience without passivity. You continue to act, refine, and persist without anxiety. Anxiety disappears not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because you are no longer dependent on outcomes for self-worth. Self-worth is anchored in integrity. As this phase stabilizes, you experience a quiet confidence that does not seek reinforcement. You are no longer proving anything, you are executing. Execution becomes the primary expression of belief. Words diminish, results accumulate. But accumulation is not the end. Accumulation without responsibility corrupts. Responsibility without accumulation frustrates. Balance must be maintained. This balance is not static. It is dynamic, requiring constant awareness. You are now close to the final threshold. The subconscious has been rewired, integrated, disciplined, and stabilized. What remains is commitment without condition, not commitment to a goal that may change, but commitment to the laws themselves, the laws of purpose, faith, discipline, persistence, imagination, decision, and responsibility. The final step is not learning something new. It is accepting something fully, accepting that your life will only rise to the level of your standards, accepting that no one is coming to rescue you, accepting that every excuse weakens identity and every decisive action strengthens it. This acceptance is not heavy. T is clarifying. It strips away fantasy and leaves power. Power that must be exercised daily, quietly, relentlessly. The subconscious is now listening completely. It awaits final instruction, not in words, but in commitment. The next phase will demand total ownership, without retreat, without compromise, without the safety of half-belief. What comes next is not development. It is declaration through action. Now you stand at the final threshold, not of learning, but of reckoning. Everything that has been revealed to you about the subconscious, about discipline, about faith, desire, imagination, decision, persistence, and responsibility converges here into a single unavoidable truth. Nothing changes unless you do. Not partially, not temporarily, not when it is convenient. Completely, permanently, without reservation. Napoleon Hill understood that the final barrier to success is never lack of knowledge. It is refusal to assume total responsibility for one's inner world. Up to this point, the subconscious has been trained, challenged, disciplined, integrated, and stabilized. But training alone does not guarantee command. Command is claimed. Claimed through action taken when there is no external pressure forcing it. Claimed when excuses would be believable, when retreat would be invisible, when no one would know if you stopped pushing. The subconscious is listening most intently now, because this is the moment where identity is either sealed or silently abandoned. This is where most people negotiate. They tell themselves they will continue, but not at the same intensity. They promise commitment, but only if results remain encouraging. They accept responsibility, but only for what feels fair. Hill would have recognized this immediately as drift attempting one final disguise. Drift does not always look like laziness. Sometimes it looks like reasonableness. Sometimes it looks like balance. Sometimes it looks like patience. But underneath, it is the same avoidance of total ownership. Total ownership is uncompromising. It means accepting that every result in your life, whether desired or resented, is connected to patterns you have allowed or enforced. It means abandoning the psychological comfort of blaming timing, upbringing, luck, economy, or other people. Those explanations may be accurate at the surface, but they are irrelevant at the level of power. Power begins where excuses end. The subconscious responds with absolute loyalty to the level of responsibility you assume. When you accept partial responsibility, it delivers partial results. When you accept total responsibility, it reorganizes everything around effectiveness. This reorganization is ruthless. Weak habits are exposed, inefficient behaviors are pressured to change, comfort is stripped of authority, what remains is clarity and strength. Hill taught that definiteness of purpose must now evolve into definiteness of character. Purpose answers what you are pursuing. Character answers who you are willing to be in pursuit of it. Character is revealed not by intention, but by behavior under pressure. The subconscious records these behaviors relentlessly. It does not forget. It does not reinterpret. It accepts them as truth. This is why the final commitment cannot be emotional. Emotion fades. It must be principled. Principle does not depend on feeling. Principle is law. When you decide that certain standards are non-negotiable, the subconscious aligns automatically. There is no more debate, no more bargaining. Action becomes consistent because identity has been finalized. At this stage, fear has no new form left to assume. It has been exposed in every disguise. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of responsibility, fear of permanence. What remains is choice. The choice to live deliberately or unconsciously. The choice to command your mind or surrender it to habit and circumstance. The choice to become the architect of your destiny or remain its byproduct. Hill believed that most people never make this choice consciously. They drift into lives they did not design and call it reality. But you no longer have that luxury. Awareness has removed your innocence. You now understand the laws governing your inner world. To ignore them is not ignorance. It is self-betrayal. Self-betrayal is the deepest form of failure because it corrodes self-respect. You can lose money and recover. You can lose opportunity and rebuild. But when you repeatedly violate your own standards, confidence collapses quietly. The subconscious learns that your word to yourself is unreliable. Once that belief is installed, no strategy can compensate for it. This is why the final command must be absolute. You must decide here and now that your word to yourself is law, that when you decide, you act, that when resistance appears, you persist, that when fear speaks, you listen without obedience, that when comfort tempts, you remember the cost of drift, that when discipline feels heavy, you recall the chaos it replaced. You are not being asked to be perfect. Perfection is a fantasy. You are being asked to be responsible. Responsible for correcting quickly, responsible for maintaining standards, responsible for refusing excuses that weaken identity, responsible for acting in alignment even when no reward is visible. Hill emphasized that success is not a single victory, but a habit of mind expressed through consistent behavior. Habits are built daily, daily through choice, choice through decision, decision through courage, courage through faith, faith through repeated action. The chain is now complete. Nothing is missing except your final consent. This consent is not spoken. It is demonstrated tomorrow morning, and the next day, and the day after that. It is demonstrated when you do what you said you would do without negotiating with mood. It is demonstrated when you protect your focus from distraction. It is demonstrated when you hold yourself to standards others do not see. It is demonstrated when you refuse to dilute your purpose for approval. The subconscious is ruthless in its honesty. It will not be persuaded by speeches, affirmations, or promises. It will only accept evidence. Evidence comes from behavior. Behavior repeated becomes belief. Belief becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. This sequence does not fail. People fail to honor it. Now the responsibility is entirely yours. No teacher, no system, no philosophy can carry it for you. They can only reveal the law. You must live it. Living it means accepting that every day you either reinforce the identity you are building or weaken it. There is no pause button. There is no neutral ground. This realization can feel heavy, but it is not meant to burden you. It is meant to free you. Freedom does not come from unlimited choice. It comes from disciplined choice aligned with purpose. When choice is disciplined, anxiety disappears. When anxiety disappears, energy returns. When energy returns, execution sharpens. You already know what you must do. The next step is not intellectual, it is behavioral. It is deciding that excuses are no longer acceptable currency. It is deciding that drifting is no longer an option. It is deciding that your subconscious will no longer be programmed by default, but by design. Design requires repetition. Repetition requires patience. Patience requires faith. Faith requires evidence. Evidence requires action. Action requires decision. Decision requires courage. Courage requires commitment. Commitment requires ownership. Ownership requires honesty. Honesty requires strength. Strength is not loud. It is consistent. It does not announce itself. It shows up day after day, when tired, when bored, when challenged, when unrecognized. That is the strength that rewires destiny. Napoleon Hill's philosophy was never about quick transformation. It was about permanent alignment. Alignment between thought, emotion, belief, and action. That alignment is now available to you, but it will not wait. Each day you delay, the old patterns attempt to reclaim territory. Each day you act, a new identity hardens. This is the final instruction the subconscious awaits, whether you will act as the person you have defined or retreat into the comfort of who you were. There is no partial acceptance. The mind responds to certainty. So decide now. Decide that you will no longer live as a passenger in your own life. Decide that you will assume total responsibility for your thoughts, your habits, your standards, and your outcomes. Decide that you will persist without guarantee, act without permission, and discipline yourself without external enforcement. Decide that you will pay the price of greatness daily rather than the cost of regret over a lifetime. Me. Stand up internally. Take command of your inner world. Speak to your subconscious through disciplined action. Prove to it relentlessly that this identity is final, that this purpose is non-negotiable, that this path is chosen consciously and walked deliberately. Do not wait for confidence. Act until confidence is inevitable. Do not wait for clarity. Act until clarity emerges. Do not wait for permission. Act until authority becomes natural. Do not wait for the world to change. Change your inner world until the outer world has no choice but to follow. This is your moment of ownership. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Choose to act. Choose to persist. Choose to discipline. Choose to decide. Choose to become, and then move forward without retreat, without excuse, without compromise, and without apology, committing fully and permanently to the work, the discipline, and the responsibility required to become the person your purpose demands, starting now